Hello and welcome to Downtime Activities, and welcome back to our bonus action podcast, video podcast, whatever you want to call it. Today a very special one, I guess. It's a very special day to us because we hit 300 subscribers! Woo!
It's a pretty big deal.
It's a very big deal. Very excited, and 300, in a world of millions of subscribed to YouTube channels isn't that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things, but to us it means a lot. 300 is more than we ever thought, and we're very excited about it. Now, in honor of this, and just because it's something we've had on our list of things to talk about for a while, this will be our Downtime Activities bonus action on Downtime Activities, talking about what you do in between adventures and in between grand quests and murder parties that are just parties, not murder, just parties. You don't have to come armed to every party that your DM sends you an invitation to.
I was going to assume that murder parties were a downtime activity.
I mean, if you're throwing them, organizing murder party is definitely a downtime activity.
Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun to do with either a bard or a rogue.
That's a very bard or rogue sort of thing.
You inherit a keep, so you just start throwing parties all the
that
time.
Are all murder. It's a murder mystery party, but you're actually murdering somebody each time.
Yeah, what a great way to get rid of your enemies.
Especially the ones that it feels like you can't get rid of because they're part of high society, but now it's like, oh, someone murdered them. I didn't do it. But we figured out who it was. It was the person I framed all along.
You get rid of two enemies for the price of one?
There you go. Bringing it back around to other downtime activities. To start with, I just kind of want to go over the list of basic downtime activities from 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, because I think that they broadly apply pretty well. They give some mechanical stuff to them, right, but we can really apply this to pretty much any system and just kind of the mindset behind each. And we're going to start with my favorite.
Well, first off, it's worth mentioning that the sort of downtime activities umbrella has really gotten expanded over the past couple of years.
That's very true.
There are not quite every rulebook, but a lot of the rulebooks have either changed how some of these mechanics work, have added entirely new things for players to do, or sort of things to seek out, whether that's sort of very statistical, or stuff just kind of the sort of patron, or sort of building your own sort of patronage stuff that got added in Tasha's, I believe. Tasha's is
that checks out.
Is the one with the whole patron system, and even some of the sort of Magic the Gathering core setting books have added stuff in sort of the same vein. I think the piety system can kind of fit into that, and a lot of stuff from Strixhaven, exactly.
Is the relationships with other students and stuff. Downtime activities is a very broad topic in the world of RPG, specifically 5e D&D. But there's kind of some basic categories they use, and they're good talking points to start with, at least. And I'm sure we'll expand on these and say other downtime activities that are not listed here that we like to do. But none is more near and dear to my heart as an Artificer fanboy than crafting. Crafting is, I think, when you think of a lot of traditional, or not traditional, video game RPGs, crafting tends to be a big part of a lot of fantasy RPGs especially. But in the tabletop, crafting can range from flavorful, I'm still using a shield, it's just a shield, but I made it, and that means something, to I am a really good crafter, so I'm making a statistical thing that gives me a big leg up in combat moving forward. Crafting there's a lot of minutia and detail about crafting, which if you're interested in, please check out the help action. I have a whole help action out on crafting, as well as spell scrolls, and a lot of going into the mechanics for 5th edition. But in terms of downtime, spending your downtime crafting, what kind of thoughts come to your mind about that?
I mean, it's one of those things that I really like craftsman characters. For me, it's kind of blacksmiths and armorers in particular that in sort of the real world, I find the trade fascinating, and I really like those characters, especially in fantasy, which is what we tend to play in, though. We haven't
the channel doesn't really show.
And I'm the same way. I really like artificers. I like inventors. and stuff like that. It's just such a wonderful character concept. And quite often crafting, unfortunately, doesn't necessarily feel like it has all that much creativity involved in it. It just is like, all right, I have declared that I spend this week working 5 hours a day on this thing. I've made, and I can mark off another 10% progress towards like completing this project. Some systems do that better than others, and can. I like D&D in particular feels like it kind of falls on the flat side of that, because like what you can craft, unless you have a merciful DM, feels fairly limited as far as
specifically with time.
Time absolutely being a big limiting factor. But it's like by and large limited to like the equipment in the book, or the spell items, or the spell scrolls, and the rules as written are relatively punishing. Luckily, they revisited those a little bit. Other systems like Blades in the Dark does it a little bit better, because what you're crafting is just like really limited only by imagination, so it feels like it has a little bit more investment. Crafting is probably the most, or one of the most common of the sort of slew of downtime activities. At least when players know that they can do it, they tend to do it. They tend to focus on it, partially just for the flavor of it, I think.
And I think that you kind of discussed the limiting factors and the like, how oftentimes it feels like I tell the DM I expend necessary gold amount, I expend necessary time amount, I have necessary labor on hand, right. I have produced this in 2 weeks of downtime. I think that that's a big oversight by both DM and player, if that's how it tends to run in your game. I think that it just comes down to being more descriptive and more inventive in how you describe what you're doing. And as a DM, I mean, you can make crafting a lot more interesting by depending on what's being crafted, by in one part deciding that there's additional ingredients or specific things needed that are maybe whole quest lines of non-downtime activities, actual quests to go on to get them. But as a downtime activity, also just like throwing little wrenches into the plan of the crafting can be very fun. You can have, maybe the players trying to make themselves a set of like very fancy high-end heavy plate armor, and the metal that they're trying to use is some adamantium or something like that. And all of a sudden when they're nearing the end of that project, the adamantium doesn't show up. And they don't know where their last shipment is to finish their project. And now that's a whole other adventure line. They can go on to find that before they finish it. And things like that can add a lot of adventure and spice. And then as a player, just being very descriptive in the final product and what you're doing to make it, I think, makes that crafting process a lot more interesting. And one last note here. If you're a crafting character, cut pieces off of everything you kill and throw it in your bag of holding. Because that's like the best thing is, and I think back to the big D&D game you ran where I was playing an artificer. It's like, I'm not making a cloak of whatever. It's like, I have hide that I've carved off of this shadow beast, and I'm going to make these clasps from the claws of this, and I'm going to craft all of this with the dragon fire I kept on a torch to bring all the way back to my furnace so I could have dragon's fire in it. And like, as a crafting character, think about that stuff and take those pieces and gather a pile of stuff. So then when you make even if you're making a DMG magic item, it's not just a flame tongue sword. It is a sword with a handle from the elder tree that we went to, and the blade is melted down and repurposed staff that was given to me by this great king, and the flame was that of the great dragon that we slew 2 sessions ago, and I used that flame to ignite it, and that it might still be statistically a flame tongue sword, but it's so much more rich and has so much history to it.
Well, and that was going to be my advice as well, is for DMs in particular, it really, for DMs and for players, because there's kind of 2 sides to this. As a player, you should absolutely make an effort to use unique items in your crafting. To use the chains from that chain devil you killed as the steel for your new sword. Or a variety of, exactly, sort of either looting enemies or cutting pieces off of monsters that you kill. And, acquiring these unique materials. And as a DM, let those have, like, let those affect the finished product. Let those actually have an effect. If, like, I remember a campaign that I was in long time ago where I wanted to, part of the character's whole goal was to upgrade his, like, 2 pistols and his sword. And it was like wood from a black ironwood tree that had been used for hanging, silver that had killed a werewolf, the chain devil's chain. I don't even remember like the whole list of things.
I think devil horn was one of the things.
It was like a grip. It was like a dozen items, and it's like I have absolutely no idea statistically what these weapons are going to do when I'm done with them. Mm-hmm. But they're going to be evil as shit. And it's going to be interesting. And if your players don't necessarily know what this will do, but maybe they kind of have some idea, but it's like, oh, it'd be cool if this was set into the handle of a blade, or this was, used to fletch, the archer's arrows or something. If they understand that using rare materials and using unique items in the crafting of equipment is going to have an effect of some kind, it adds this whole sort of spin the wheel mechanic, and players love that.
They love spin the wheel mechanics.
Literally any sort of spin the wheel mechanic in any game, players are always about it. Even if they know that some of the consequences are dire, that doesn't stop them from continuing to crank that slot machine handle. It's actually an excellent DM tip that any type of that sort of gambling or spin the wheel mechanic that you can add to games will, like, the players will just keep coming back to it. We were at some big festival in a Spelljammer game way back in the day, and it was a stupid ring toss game or something, but we very quickly learned that the prizes were just completely bizarre and random.
It was from a magical box that they pulled out a random table item.
Which is why we had to just keep going. We spent every cent we had on the stupid ring toss game because the prizes were bizarre and largely useless. One pull's a vodka martini, the next pull was a canoe. Like, it was...
Shaken, not stirred.
It's completely useless, but we kept coming back to it because the effect was random. Mm-hmm. Crafting should be approached the same way.
You could have a very similar thing and have the same level of buy-in and, like, fun from players.
If players decide to make cloaks out of dragon scales with a different color for each member of the party, let those have some kind of statistical effect. If they want to embed a holy relic in the grip of their sword or in their shield, let that do something. Mm-hmm. They don't have to know what it's going to do when they set out to make it, but there should be some kind of effect because of the unique materials they're using. And once the players understand that that's how crafting works, they're going to spend a lot more time doing it. Crafting itself is going to feel a lot more interesting, and they're going to have a lot more investment in it.
And now I think we all want to play the D&D fantasy Power Rangers with our different colored dragon scale suits and go fight rapping pumpkins. But anyway, I think that's like... And another real important thing to kind of take from the crafting section of Downtime activities, specifically in a fantasy setting, 5e and etc., it's not just crafting arms and armor. Like, right. Crafting can be creating just about anything. And your crafting, if you decided that you want to take painter's supplies as your thing you're able to do, all of a sudden you spend your 2 weeks of downtime making a beautiful portrait of the local like king, and then you show up when you're asking for a mission from them with that as a like door opening gift. It's like, we bought you a fancy bottle of wine and I made a portrait of you, and then you roll a crit fail and it's hideous and people are offended, and that's a fun interaction. But like, crafting can be so broad and you can be so creative with it, and don't look at like, oh, I get a tool proficiency from this, I'll just take blacksmiths because that's what every fighter takes, and I'll move on with my day and I'll probably never use it. Like, take whatever you want and then find a reason to use it. Even if it's something super simple, it can be a really fun, creative problem solving or just RP tool in your toolbox. The
bard in your party with brewer's supplies who's on a quest to create, just stronger and stronger beers over the course of the campaign, and watching how that begins to fold into interactions with NPCs and interactions with other party members, and like this exactly like sort of the things he collects, like. It's like all of a sudden he's got a dragonfire torch because he's got some crazy idea for a new, Imperial barrel-aged stout using this dragon's fire. And oh boy, when he gets back, like, the world might never seen a beer like he's about to make. And then it's the same thing. It's, you're rolling to see exactly how well he does in that. Or, if the player just RPs well enough, they don't have to roll. And then, like, that just gives you as the DM another fun tool to play with. Just deciding, like, okay, here's what that beer's like. I've got that written on a sticky note.
Do you have to distill purple worm venom before it just gets you absolutely shit-faced drunk with a single sip, doesn't kill you in a single sip? Ooh. That bard will find out. And many people die in the process, probably.
Well, I think what you probably have to do is make, like... I think it's the combination of purple worm venom and purple worm like anti-venom. Oh. It's the two of them together where it's just like
you get violently ill and then the antitoxin kicks in at just the right moment.
It's like here, take a shot of this and you're gonna trip balls.
It's literally like it's like a car bomb where you like drop the you have like an antitoxin and you drop it in and then slam it back. Look, this is a whole story arc for a character that in the end they have their purple worm venom with their antitoxin.
And whether that bard is like wanting to build a tavern to show off all of his great beers, or whether he's violently opposed to taverns because he's the better brewer, like either way, that character's story becomes fun and becomes interesting, and like almost every interaction that character makes is going to be flavored by that downtime activities pursuit.
A barbarian path of the totem who takes woodcarver supplies and carves personal totems for every member of the party. And they may not be magical, but it's like he finds their spirit animal on some vision quest and he's like, the bard is definitely the horny badger and gives him this badger statue. And it's like, our brave heroic paladin, you are a stag, and like has this stag. And that's like a personal gift given that's created for those party members, and they will care more about that little statuette in their inventory than they do about their flame-tongued sword, probably, because of the time and thought.
No, I have, in video games are much the same way. I mean, the vast majority of times that I played through Skyrim, my characters were habitual collectors. They, it's like I'm not going to get rid of this old journal because I found it in a dungeon, and that's kind of neat. And like, this is my old armor set, so I'll just throw that in the chest of my house, and this is the sword.
Eventually, I'll get an armor rack and I'll put it up so that I can display it.
Exactly. Here are all of these items that were important to one of my quests at one point. It's not just meaningless loot, so. It's like, I'm never going to carry Chillrend, but I'll stick it up on a sword rack next to two other, Daedric artifacts.
Yeah, exactly.
Characters, by and large, tend to do that in tabletop RPGs across the board as well. Devils of the West is a good example as far as just like the weird things characters just collect, and if you can mix some level of the sort of downtime activities pursuits into that, they're much less likely to just view them as useless items.
Yeah, exactly. So crafting, no matter what character you're playing, you are probably in some way, shape, or form playing a crafting character. You'll have access to something that you can do with that downtime to make something. And even if your character's not good at it, like you don't even have to have proficiency or like a skill, depending on what system you're playing, for that thing. If you just decided that your character, a funny thought, your character is the barbarian character, and you have no ability to paint, but your character wants to be a painter, then you spend your downtime activities practicing painting, which we'll get into later, is like getting better at something. Eventually you might get a skill at it. But in the meantime, like, you now have made the, like, portrait of the king's wife, and you really want to give it to them because you put your heart and soul into this masterpiece, and it's just like a stick figure with boobs, and he's very offended.
All I can think of What is fruit?
Fruit.
Plant.
Plant. Tit. They're the fucking same.
I'm just thinking
Black
of that.
Sails,
I'm
watch
thinking
it.
of that painting.
But yeah, literally that painting, and that can be a hilarious moment. You don't even have to be a crafting character to use crafting for some awesome story-driven,
or in sort of that same vein as the painting from Black Sails, the rogue who's shit at painting but is trying to be a forger is like that. It's almost certainly a downtime activity storyline that the rest of the party's going to have to bail that character out of at one point or another. But that character's quest to sell these really, really just terrible forged paintings is incredible, especially if he's an extremely charismatic individual.
Silver tongue devil.
He can talk somebody into buying this painting for just an exorbitant cost, and everybody knows it's just a shit, terrible painting.
It's just a stick figure with boobs drawn on it. But he's so convincing that he makes it happen.
That takes a ribbon ability on your character sheet, makes it something much more interesting, and gives rise to what will probably be some of your favorite moments of the campaign.
Definitely. A good kind of jump from this to the next is the practicing a profession. Oftentimes, skill sets, crafting abilities can transfer well with practicing a profession, but there's lots of different professions and stuff that characters can have. Depending on your system, it might be a background or backstory, or it might even be the class of the character or whatever. Practicing a profession. What do you think of that as spending your downtime practicing a profession?
It quite often ends up feeling like, or it can at service level end up feeling like kind of the same thing as crafting, where it's just I spend my week manning the general store that I own.
Now I get a modest lifestyle for free.
Right. And it doesn't necessarily feel like you're doing anything. I think once again, though, that's kind of an issue with running the game and not necessarily an issue with the downtime, that activity itself. And there are plenty of ways for the characters to have sort of either interesting jobs that either spawn side quests or spawn interesting encounters. For example, they mentioned in the rogue section of the player's handbook that a lot of sort of legitimate rogues are like rat catchers or sort of exterminators, and the idea of playing in this sort of pseudo 14th century city, playing a character who is a dedicated rat catcher is kind of an interesting. Yeah, you're adventuring, you're helping save the kingdom on the side. Maybe you're picking a pocket or two, but what your job technically is catching rats and making sure there's never a sort of true infestation in the city. That gives rise to interesting possibilities for little side quests, or just interesting moments and interactions. All of a sudden, especially if you can come up with kind of a fun rat killing mini game, that it's that's something that that player's going to keep coming back and doing.
I'll look forward to it in between adventures.
And then he's teaching the barbarian how to help, which gives rise to interesting social interactions of he's helping clear rats out of a noble cellar, and the barbarian is taking far too heavy a hand with it. It's I'm sorry, Count, he's new. It's, just learn.
He's my apprentice.
Exactly. It's or actually having an apprentice and using the sidekick rules, or just having a statted NPC that's I've got this punk ass 14-year-old kid following me around learning my trade. So you either have to be really evasive about this other adventuring stuff that you're doing, or you have to just either work hard to keep them alive, or just be all right, stay here and man the store.
You keep catching those rats. I gotta go save the kingdom again.
Yep. And all of a sudden there's more depth to the character. There's more depth to the world because there's another NPC living in it that you're interacting with, that sometimes you have to bail out of trouble.
And it also gives, those interactions and stuff, and just the job you're doing gives rise to the DM to just drop plot in your lap. Absolutely. All of a sudden you're off rat catching and you find a body floating in the sewer and you recognize a sigil on it or whatever, and now it's what the hell's going on with this? Or your character runs a tavern and all of a sudden you hear a weird piece of gossip, and that can spur a whole that's kind of the whole point of running a tavern, is to hear all the gossip and get adventuring.
A thieves guild comes in to shake down the store that you're running. All of a sudden the rats that you're catching this week are literally in all dimensions twice as big as the rats you were catching last week. And then the next week they're again twice as big. And it's like,
this is an exponential problem that needs solved.
Something's going on here. And that's an easy way that's a fun way to drag the rest of the party in when the rogue shows back up at the guild hall one day with a rat that's larger than a cat. It's just like,
something's wrong.
It's like, this is the smallest one I've got today. It's like, okay.
I couldn't carry the others.
let's look into this. Let's figure out what's going on. And as a game master and as a player, work hard to make the profession somewhat detailed.
Yeah.
Similar to crafting, put some detail into it, put some life into it, and you'll get a lot more out of it. And it's, as a student of history, like, guild politics from the Middle Ages are cutthroat and fascinating and incredibly deep. Mix a little bit of that intrigue into your campaign. If there's a cobbler's guild that are fixing all of the prices, because that's what guilds do, are you as the cobbler joining the guild? Are you trying to operate out of it? Are you actually raising your prices past the guild standard? But raising your quality as well? Like, what happens when a new guild leader steps in? What happens if something forces a guild to dissolve? Like, mixing any little bit of that sort of social intrigue into the campaign is going to make the sort of downtime activities, the career side of the campaign, feel like a much more major part of the campaign.
And it can scale and stuff too, where all of a sudden your character who starts as I want to start being a cobbler, and then, by level 10, you are the guild master of the Cobbler's Guild, and you have to deal with, oh, well, this guy undercut prices, what are we going to do about it? And all of a sudden your Cobbler's Guild becomes this, you're a rogue cobbler, and your Cobbler's Guild is basically a thieves guild, because you're like bashing in windows and shaking people down who aren't following your guild policies. And that can be a whole adventuring arc and a whole story in your kind of hometown.
Well, the Tanner's Guild is raising their prices. And
the seamstresses are running dangerously low right now.
And they're refusing to, sell anything to this other guild, and we kind of need both of them on good terms here. So, like, it's kind of fun to do a microcosm of the large-scale politics of your D&D game, because there's so many D&D games, or really just tabletop RPG games across the board, deal with those sort of large-scale political interactions, between lords and kingdoms and, like, entire factions. It's kind of fun to scale all of that down into guilds, into different streets or different districts of the city, and force the players to kind of muddle through that as well. And I think the other... That's kind of, like, really fitting... That's kind of going the route of really fitting your career into, like, the world and the story at large. I think the other way to do it is something we were kind of talking about before we started recording, which is forcing your sort of career stuff to be a relatively mundane but necessary task, and really forcing a time balance between the, like, whether it's dungeon crawling or adventuring or whatever you're doing, and the, like, just, like, day-to-day, like, mundane sort of life sim stuff that you have to do. And really, I think you can get a lot of mileage out of really forcing that dichotomy, but forcing the players to balance them. A lot of video games work this way, where you have to balance your time between, it's like, well, I could go into the mines and, try and get some loot and, slay some slimes or some goblins. Like, but I also really need to make sure I'm back by this time to do these two things.
I have my board meeting at 3 o'clock, and if I miss it again, I'm off.
And it's like, and I don't know if I can necessarily go quite as boring as, like, a board meeting, but, like, if your character has a part-time job that they have to go do, or have a date that they have to make, all of a sudden, like, like part of what becomes fun about the gameplay is that like kind of goofy time management of like all right, time to leave the Shadow Realm, fellas. Like he's got a part-time job he's got to get to. He's got to get home to dinner with his parents, and I think she's got a date. And like then all of a sudden, so that kind of career side stuff, you get into your part-time job is boring, but like strangely funny and suspenseful.
And especially at low level.
Absolutely.
That kind of stuff. And like, if you're like a low level party of adventurers who is adventuring to make ends meet, you might have to have a day job for some of that, and that might be part of your functionally making ends meet and getting a little extra coin in your coffers.
Or the core sort of task that the players are doing isn't something that's making them money.
They're all philanthropists. They're saving the realm is just their hobby, but they work part time.
Well, it's if you're going the sort of Batman route or something like that, you're not getting paid to save the city by night, but you need to make sure you get enough sleep to make it to your job the next morning, and so that and you've got to show up to these two parties to make sure that people don't get suspicious, but at the same time, around the same time, you've got to go out and stop this guy from doing whatever Batman villains do. It's forcing
freezing people mostly,
making that or making them laugh, asking them really weird riddles.
I think it's mostly freezing them and making bad puns. If my consumption of Batman media has taught me anything, all in an Austrian accent.
But all of a sudden, that sort of mundane, career time sink stuff becomes a very important part of the campaign, and there's a balancing act to be struck there. That's and it's the balancing of it that makes it fun and makes it interesting.
And as we're saying, for all of these, you can have whole campaigns based around these.
Absolutely.
Even if you're not, though, in lesser ways you can apply these two campaigns and have it be a very functional side adventure that your characters are doing that's really fun.
And an easy way to make some, especially sort of career stuff or pursuing a trade, more necessary is to actually have expenses. We are guilty in quite a few campaigns of not necessarily charging for every hotel room, not necessarily charging for food or rations or stuff like that. And that kind of bookkeeping isn't always fun, which is why quite often we just ignore it. I tend to enjoy that sort of balancing act.
It's the right kind of player who really enjoys that.
Absolutely. Stuff. And if you want sort of career stuff to matter, expenses and costs should matter as well. Because that's where it's going to feel worth it is, I work for a week and make 7 gold, but I only spend 3.5 gold, so that's my expenses covered. So now anything I make from adventuring, I can spend on equipment or other costs. And it just forces the players to always keep moving. In the big sort of Treasure Planet campaign that I ran, running your guys' crews were really expensive. You were especially when you got the Blood of Queen Morgan, your much larger ship. You had a lot, but you decided to keep the Siren. You had a lot of people to feed, and luckily I wasn't making you run pay because you were a pirate crew. But you were quite often all right, I think we can sail there and back, but then we need to raid a ship, or we need to find some treasure to loot or something.
Or we need to do it as a legitimate mercantile transfer of goods from one place to another.
Just because, otherwise, we're not going to have enough money to keep feeding the crew. It just makes that sort of career pursuit stuff actually feel somewhat worthwhile and somewhat necessary.
Yeah, and again, bookkeeping, do it to the level that your group enjoys.
Right.
And oftentimes, you don't necessarily need, for those kind of big arcing stories like that crew, you don't necessarily need to have a full play group of people who enjoy bookkeeping. If you've got one person who just that is their jam, then you give them the extra sheet of paper, and it's they're the person in charge of keeping track of the rations for your guys' pirate crew. Now, that person gets to have this mini game that's very fun to them, and it breeds story. It breeds let's go and raid this ship because otherwise the boys aren't going to eat and they're going to get rowdy. So we got to get some money.
And all of a sudden it makes really weird, mundane items super valuable loot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're running a shop and adventuring on the side, and you get some just completely random thing that is like, oh, this would actually be super useful for my shop. It's like all of a sudden players are excited about really weird,
a scale.
strangely mundane
I've been needing
things.
one of those.
Exactly. You know, or the Dragonfire is an excellent example. Whether or not there was a dragon involved, it's just like, I mean, players might be like, "Whoa, Dragonfire torch. That's neat, but that'd be a lot of effort to keep this thing around. And you know, every hour we have to swap to a new torch."
But now the baker has Dragonfire hearth,
Right.
that he can make his bread.
You know, and now your blacksmith is advertising, you know, steel.
Forged in Dragonfire.
Exactly. It's you know, it's all of a sudden it becomes this really valuable and interesting piece of loot, even though it's something that's ultimately sort of mundane or sort of uninteresting.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to another one. This one's pretty mechanics focused, but you can RP it in a way that makes it very interesting, and that is recuperating.
Right.
Kind of your downtime spent for the sick, the injured, the poisoned, the cursed, the whatever it is, depending on your system, depending on the rules for recovering from those kinds of things. Something that I'd like to get, I do okay at sometimes, but I'd like to get better at, and some of it's player driven, some of it's game master driven, is in our Devils of the West game. There are times where you guys have injuries kind of built up, and I have the option that if you spend your week of downtime in a medical facility, you'll have a better chance of recovering. I'd like to make that more involved. And there's times where, oftentimes it's because our resident yeehaw horny boy, Grimes, aka Jocelyn.
I thought for sure this was going to be a story about Dr. Bogus. Because it's always a story about Dr.
Well,
Bogus.
Grimes is always the one getting shot. But it's kind of the like, are there any cute nurses in here? And then now that's a social interaction. It's not just everyone else is doing their downtime activities, but you have to sit and do nothing for a week. Even making time spent recovering interesting in a roleplay opportunity can go a long way.
And Savage Worlds, I think, is better about forcing wounds to linger. And that's part of the reason that we like using what is, at least in the older Adventure Edition, considered kind of the like hardcore, like gritty, difficult way to play, which is every wound you take, you roll off of the injuries table. But that I just like the feel of wounds taking time to heal. And obviously if you roll high on a medical check, you could just kind of get rid of it right away and not have to deal with it. But like quite often you've got a limp for a week or two. You're you know, you have to keep that eye bandaged for a while. You can't use that arm very well. You know, it's always in a sling for a little while. It adds a lot of depth to the world, and it just feels it feels a little more cinematic, I guess.
It makes combat matter.
Absolutely.
It makes you a lot more apprehensive to throw yourself into danger's way, because you might have that gimp leg for a month.
Well, you know, and when we were first experimenting with Savage Worlds and just like quite honest, like quite literally, I was running a couple of just one-on-one campaigns so that we could just sit down and learn how do we make a character in this? Okay, let's look up that rule, because what you've just asked to do, I think you can do, but
how do I make a lawful neutral detective in this system?
You know, and one of the NPCs in like your first session got like his arm badly clawed, and it took that wound a couple weeks to heal. So he's just like he's still showing up to work every morning. He's still out in the field helping with investigations, but he's got his arm in a sling. That just immediately was like, okay, this is kind of cool. Like I kind of like how this looks and how this feels. In D&D, for the most part, there are some optional rules for like sort of lasting wounds and diseases and stuff like that. But by and large, D&D is a like healing spell. Let's go.
Let's sleep through the night so that all of our wounds go away.
It just tends to be that kind of system, which honestly is fine. It doesn't get in the way of telling stories, and it really frees up the players and the game masters to like really like to do other things. So it's actually interesting to me that D&D has that like a little thing about like recuperating. But if it's a part of the system you use, or if you can find a kind of fun way to use it, within D&D. It's not always necessarily a fun way to spend your time, but once again, it kind of depends on what you do with it and what the DM just kind of forces to happen in the midst of it while you're playing. And even just long rests can kind of be considered downtime activities as well, as long as you're not taking it like in a dungeon. And so that's I think kind of a lot of where that's probably meant to fit.
It is an opportunity to recuperate or to use that downtime for some minor version, even if it is out in the field in some capacity. And I mean, the rules that exist for D&D with downtime activities recuperating are functionally useful. They just don't come up that often. It's a lot of longer lasting diseases, poisons, and like hit point altering effects that it really is a part of. And those are oftentimes either not long lasting, don't happen at all, or there's some spell that somebody can cast to get rid of it. So it's not really a necessary thing to do. But you can still, like, even if it's just the role play side of things, if your character has a near death experience and then you guys have a week of downtime, you don't have to get a statistical benefit. You can say that my character is nursing his wounds, my character is at the bar in a sling, drinking some grog and taking it easy because he has had enough after what just happened to him. Like, his arm is working better each day, but he's just taking it easy and giving himself some time to rest.
The rogue warned us about the cat-sized rats. He didn't warn us about the dog-sized rats. I'd need a couple days to think about everything I've seen while the rest of them finish dealing with that problem. Blocking off the last of the taunts.
So recuperate, and that's the other thing is all of this downtime activities, you don't have to get something out of it.
Right.
You can 100%, what you get out of it can be a fun social moment, an RP, a description, and that's what a lot of us live for when we're playing these games. That's the whole point. Moving on. These next two, I'd like to kind of, probably shouldn't really lump these together. These are kind of two other things to discuss. Researching is one. And there's specific kind of ways of going about researching statistically what it does for you. But I think that researching is a huge part, maybe just because that's how I play. Whenever I'm playing a character, I tend to be the character who's like, okay, we have an idea of this problem. I want to spend the next week in the library learning about it.
Right.
And let's go to the local library, the local biblioplex, the local whatever fancy arcane school, and let's look into this. Let's see if we can find any texts on this, any historical information, any tucked away journals that can give us more knowledge. Or research can also just be like, we're going after this specific type of monster. Let's ask around the adventurer bars and see if anyone else has fought one and what happened to them. And like the research is seeking information. It's not always in a library, but it should be rewarded. The DM should have at least there be a chance that they find something useful, and players should go out of their way to do it, especially if they're the bookish style character.
Well, and there's a balance to be struck, right? Because as the game master, you've got this moment you want to be a surprise. You've got these reveals you don't want to come until later. So it's kind of a balance between like giving the players enough that they sort of know where to begin or like have another step forward, but not just like sort of laying out the whole plot for them at the beginning. Or if you are laying out the whole plot for them at the beginning, it's enough of an insurmountable problem that it's going to take the rest of the campaign to figure out how to deal with it. Yes, you tend to use research literally all the time.
It's the kind of characters I tend to play.
And I've used, I've kind of done so much stuff with Ed Parnell a lot as well in Devils of the West. And, even if you're not going to give them specifics, give them sort of adjacent information, give them sort of similar avenues to look down and let them start to build some of their own kind of conclusions. And it's a fun way to drop some hints or to make sure they're prepared for certain stuff, or to just like lay out some adjacent facts or some sort of rumors and stuff, and let the players make their own preparations and maybe
and try their own assumptions.
Absolutely, and maybe some of those preparations are quests on their own, or it requires the craftsman's character to make something, or it requires somebody else to track down information in a totally different way, a much more social way. The whole sort of research thing doesn't have to be static. It should be mixed into a lot of the other sort of types of preparations and a lot of the other kind of downtime activity stuff, if possible.
And this also brings up a related but very different conversation, which is that skill checks, even critically successful ones that you have a plus 20 to, don't necessarily always succeed. If you are researching and the DM says make a investigation check and you crit it, and they're like, as the DM, if you have a secret that there is no book in this library that will ever tell them about it, you don't have to suddenly manifest a book there for them to find. They're like, oh, here's the big reveal. Haha, I got it. And that in and of itself can be a piece of information they gather. It's in how you word it.
Yes.
Instead of saying you don't find anything about the book,
it's you are certain
there's nothing to find. Exactly.
Yes.
Like if you think if there's any way you could find information about this in this library, you'd be the person to do it. And there's no information about this person. This person you're trying to look up is beyond nebulous. No one has any information on this person at all.
Well, and there was a moment kind of like that, during one of your like rolling a 35 or whatever on investigation as you were constantly doing in my first like big D&D campaign. There was a moment kind of like that, which is just like it's like you find nothing. You don't just find nothing, you find suspiciously nothing. Like, you're confident enough and certain enough in like your abilities and your like investigative prowess that you think somebody like and potentially at a divine level has worked to cover this up. And we had a similar incident in like Return to Dracos campaign that we did, where it's like we all of a sudden began to find evidence of a dragon that like even the gods had like wiped away all knowledge of. And putting those pieces together is extremely satisfying for players. Players finding nothing because if there was something to find, they would have found it, isn't necessarily its own reward, but it's quite satisfying in its own way.
It takes away that sting of I rolled really well and I didn't get anything out of it. Like a lack of information. If you're a good investigator, a lack of information is often a pile of information. Is this information not here because it doesn't exist? Is this information not here because somebody's intentionally keeping it away from me? Why do I fail at this task?
Well,
that can be a lot.
And, depending on what is there to find or kind of how you're telling your story as the game master, that's a piece of information you can give them. They don't find anything because they, find where something used to be. They don't find anything because there's nothing to find. Like, if a player knows that they failed because somebody else stole this information first and is keeping it secret, that gives them a lot of information that immediately makes them want to like find who did it. Maybe they have their suspicions. It is absolutely kind of a reward unto itself, and it is sort of its own chunk of information. And you're right, it removes the sting of like feeling like your crit failed. It's especially the way most people play Dungeons and Dragons. Crits can be a big deal. It's not like earth shattering, like the entire world has changed now that I've rolled a crit, but like you roll a crit on something and you're like, oh yes, did it. Nice. And then it's like, oh yeah, nothing happens because you were going to fail either way. Doesn't quite feel right. But finding nothing because there's nothing to find,
and you're certain of that, it softens the blow and it gives some information. And the last one that they have here is training, which training I think is another one that mechanically is going to be very dependent on systems and stuff like that. If you can get something out of it as a DM though, or a GM, as a Star Master, depending on which system you're running, a title I once wore well, you should reward time spent trying to improve at things. And that doesn't necessarily mean, and some players might try and game the system or whatever, that each week that a player spends, like, I'm going to spend a lot of time with horses this week. Oh, here's animal handling. Oh, you have proficiency in it. And it's like handing that kind of stuff out. But what it could mean is we have 2 weeks of downtime in this area that's known for breeding the best horses. I spend a lot of time with this horse master and you have all these interactions during this 2 weeks. As a DM, you might reward that not with like a big overarching skill proficiency or something, but specifically for maintaining control of the horse in hard situations, you give them an advantage of some sort. Or something along those lines, like a borderline ribbon ability that will come up at some point and will make it feel like a reward, but isn't necessarily like something that will make them feel like they need to always be training in their downtime to try and just accrue this mountain of skills.
Well, and as a player, it's an excellent way to sort of establish the background for the next level that you want to take, the next edge you want to take. If you've been, and that's kind of how the 5th edition player's handbook kind of flavors multi-classing anyway. It's like, well, the fighter's been spending a bunch of time doing bullshit with the rogue on the weekends, so like when he levels up, he decides to dip a level into rogue because he's picked up a few tricks. If you kind of have an idea of a multi-class you want to do, or an edge you want to take, or a new skill you want to take, when the next level up comes around, it's an excellent way to spend your kind of downtime activities, or kind of leaning into those stuff that's adjacent to that. Learning to be kind of a pickpocket, or learning kind of stealth from the rogue, learning a bit of magic from the wizard, training up a skill like that. So then when you hit the next level up, you just it feels very seamless to take to dip into another class, or take a sort of odd edge, because like, oh yeah, and everyone else at the table's kind of immediately like, oh yeah, because he was doing all that stuff with the rogue, that totally makes sense. Like, hey, that's kind of a cool transition. It's kind of a cool moment, and it just brings something that's very much a part of the systems, multi-classing, a little bit sort of more into alignment.
And you as a player need to try and set those things up, both in the actions you're taking, the people you're interacting with, the things you're seeking out, also with out of character, out of game session conversations with your DM.
Absolutely.
Times. If it's the like, I've been considering, that might, hopefully that doesn't sound terrible. I've been considering getting into witchcraft with this character. I want a natural way for that to flow. And then the DM's like, oh, well, you guys are interacting with the witch right now, and there's something's probably about to happen where there's going to be a book left over. That's going to work really well. The timing of this is going to be great, and I can make sure that works well. And
it's easy. It gives the DM an easy avenue to drop things into the player's lap, to introduce NPCs that are sort of adjacent to where that player's sort of leaning, or even just to like force things to happen in. If the paladin character's kind of like, is kind of feeling like, I'd kind of rather restat as like the fallen paladin, because like the abilities are really cool, and I think that'd be a cool kind of twist for my character arc. That gives the DM license to just wipe out your whole paladin order and like put you on this revenge plot. Never have anything you care about as a
unless
RPG
you're somebody who enjoys watching it burn and having a revenge mission.
Honestly, though, you should like, that's always the whole thing, is like, I'm an orphan and I have no personal connections.
I love no one.
That way you can't kill anyone that I love. Honestly, you should have all those personal connections baked in. It makes for much better characters. Yes, at times the DM might threaten some of those, but like it's done to like tell a better story, and it's whether it's the succeeding or failing, and that makes your character more interesting. But that's totally a different
that's another
conversation. But like training and skills is one that we use occasionally in D&D, or rather we sort of reward players occasionally with new proficiencies, new languages, or new skills. But it works far better if the players are setting those up. And honestly, the best way to do it is to use that to sort of presage a multi-class or something like that.
A new skill that you're going to take, or an edge, or whatever system's word is for their thing. I think that's the best way as a player you can use. You can kind of put that into action, and then make sense of the change that you've already decided to make in your character. We're getting pretty close to the stopping point there for a multitude of reasons. We've got stuff to do. But I think that what's kind of your big takeaways with downtime activities? What was the big takeaway you think that like the kind of umbrella advice you would give for people wanting to have improved downtime activities at their table?
I mean, lean into them more, but it requires both the DM and the player to put more detail into them, to flesh them out, and to like tie them back to the character and tie them back to the world. But if you can do that, you're going to get a lot more mileage out of your main story, and even like side quests and stuff like that. It makes the world feel more alive. It adds more depth to the characters. And like this list is by no means comprehensive. I mean, festivals, I think, are an excellent sort of downtime activity, or little... And side quests can absolutely be downtime activities too. You know, find interesting and amusing and like sort of deep ways to like let players spend time outside of their quests and outside of the main story, because like ultimately that's probably going to be the stuff that's actually remembered when the campaign's over. And
really with downtime activities, don't let yourself get so hyperfixated, both as players and as the game master, on the main quest line that you get super hand wavy with them. I think that being hand wavy with downtime is a really quick way to lose like half of the fun of your story. You have a lot of opportunity for very fun stories to be told in all sorts of different ways, and really good pauses in the action for a different kind of interaction altogether. Don't let your like kind of that brain of like, okay, next thing, let you just be like, okay, I'll just I craft this during this time. Like let yourself think about it and be creative and describe it. And as a GM, expect that and request that of your players, that like, okay, so you're crafting this. Let's talk, like, where are you going to do that? Who are you going to talk to? Who do you need to talk to get the pieces to do that? And like, just take that little bit of time. If you're a murder hobo party, if you're the way you play the games, you like just dive into dungeons and kill stuff, more power to you. I'm guessing most groups are not that way, and that little bit of time you take, that little description you give, goes a long way to making a much more fun and believable and bought into story.
As players, care less about the statistical benefits or the loot benefits of doing side activities and doing like these various sort of downtime activities. And as a game master, give out statistical effects and loot a little more freely when it comes to downtime activities and sort of side quests and side activities.
Don't make them punishing.
Right. Reward your players for good RP. Reward your players for getting involved in goofy little, side activities. And it's, I mean, you're absolutely right about like, you're going to miss half the game if you don't step off of the main path. We've been playing a lot of Divinity Original Sin 2. It's like we just really enjoyed it, and we are in the middle of a sort of branching quest section where it's like we need to successfully talk to, without killing, like 2 of these 7 people. One of which we killed way before we knew that was a thing, and we just sort of, by talking to one person, completely invalidated another quest line. There's an NPC that we're like, all right, we'll like go and retrieve this item, this cursed item for this obviously evil guy. Then like the first person we run into is just like, why don't you give it to me instead? We were like, yeah, sure. But so we could just find the next one, move on, and just like burn through the main story. But like all of our conversations the last time we played were like, all right, do we want to go do this side quest, or do we want to go kill that NPC that we didn't get the thing to? Like,
we want to go and have that interaction.
Because the guy's super evil, and we kind of want to tell him that we gave it to somebody else. Like, it's like we could easily just burn through the main game and miss all of this random side stuff. But then we're not we're just missing so much of the game, and we're having fun playing the game.
Yeah.
So we want to do the arena fights. We want to break into this barracks and get this thing. We need the charismatic elf to talk to this ghost who's following his old sea captain around, ringing a bell in her ear, just to be an asshole. Like, we're going to do every quest we can. We're going to explore everywhere we can, because that's the game.
That's the point. That's why we play.
That's the thing with tabletop RPGs. Is like, we want to play them. Mm-hmm. And we
don't want to rush through playing
more of them if we get to do side quests and do activities and explore the world a little bit. And that's where the DM gets to have more fun as well, is in the side quests and in these sort of weird little side activities. There's, quite often the best characters and the best moments aren't along the story path. Maybe the most cinematic moments. But, the moments everyone's going to remember, the NPCs everyone's going to remember, tend to be hidden off in sort of back alleys and weird little side corners. And it's worth slowing down, pursuing a career, or, working at crafting and involving yourself in all of those little quest lines and their own little sort of worlds.
Mm-hmm. Take the time, invest yourself into the world as a player. Give ample opportunity for it as a DM. Absolutely. And reward it. Reward the hell out of it in ways that are creative and fun. Hope this has been useful. Hope people have enjoyed this. It's always fun to have these conversations. Always spurs a lot of ideas for both of us, I know. Thank you for 300 subscribers for anyone watching this. That's very exciting. It's super awesome. And that's why we're talking about downtime activities on Downtime Activities. I would do our normal outro, but we don't normally do our outro on the bonus action, so we'll just do the end of it.
You don't know when we do the outro anymore.
I hardly know the outro. Enjoy your downtime activities, though, everybody, in-game and out of it. And thank you for 300 subscribers. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.
Great. But there's a lot of stuff that Word just does better because it's been around many times as long.
Word is better. I prefer Google Docs. But that's mainly due to the fact that even for my own personal work, I have a computer that is like a, that can easily have Google connected, and a Google phone that I can easily have all my docs and stuff shared, that I can literally be like, oh, I have an idea for that thing I was working on, pull out my phone, edit something on it really quick, and then later when I'm working on it on here, it just automatically updates, and it's very fluid and easy for me.
Well, and in playing Devils of the West, I was able to just, because I had put all of the Halter's Parish stuff just up on the drive, I could just pull up the list of the various Halter's Parish characters.
As could I, which is the interconnectivity.
Which otherwise is just like, okay, so I have to copy all this down into my phone or email a list to myself or something. So it is nice in that regard. One of the big things, at least because of a lot of the work I do for the channel and a lot of the work that I like to do when running tabletop RPGs, is like the kind of graphic design stuff. Like making things that feel like they exist within the universe that the story's taking place is much easier on Microsoft Office products. Partially just because I can install fonts into Word and into PowerPoint, and I can't.
Also, you just have learned how to use. Over the years, you've just turned PowerPoint into more or less Photoshop.
Yeah, I've just learned how to break PowerPoint. Pushing it far beyond what it was ever meant to do. Like making maps that are 36 by 24 inches in PowerPoint. With a topo layer and just all sorts of stuff. And then
functioning as intended.
And then figuring out that can't technically I can't get a double-sided poster made of that size without spending $1,000. So then having to that was some of my work this morning, is starting to scale some of that work back around to 11 by 17 so we can get the maps made for a secret project. I don't know if you're recording right now, so I don't.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
In case this is going to be, this is somehow part of the
if this is like the bonus action, I don't
bonus.
want to mention the name of the secret project yet. Have we? I don't think. Have we mentioned it? I don't think we have.
I'm trying to think of a clever code name.
Border Collie.
Border Collie.
Code name Border Collie.
The code name biblical reference main character names.
I'm a fan of codename Border Collie myself, but, you know.
I mean, we could always do code name How It Feels to Step on 5 Gum. Stimulate your senses.
I don't know. I don't know where that came from.
I was trying to think of a specific phrase and how to translate that into a code name, and How It Feels to Step on 5 Gum is now the official code name of that project.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, and you know, and that's a whole project that would have been impossible if I was relying just on Google Docs.
Yes.
Because of
like
because you've seen, I think, one document from that. Like I think you've seen your character sheet, or at least the in progress of your character sheet. But that whole project would be impossible without either knowing how to break PowerPoint. Yeah, I mean it'd all be some of it would be much easier in Photoshop. I know that. But Word just has design and layout functionality, and especially stuff with fonts that just means I can just kind of build what I need to build and just run it all in Word, and it would be nearly impossible in Google Docs. So yeah, I'm not here to rag on Google Docs. We use Google Docs a lot.
Rely on Google Docs for many things, but Word is better. I prefer Google Docs. It's just
well, you know, it's like in order for us to
can accept that I'm wrong.
In order for
I'm
us,
just not going to change.
In order for us to not rely to have the same functionality that Google Docs gives us, and not rely on Google Docs, we would need an office with just dozens of whiteboards.
Not to mention switching back and forth between processors. As somebody who is on the tail end of switching back to Office after being a company that worked through Office and then decided to switch to Google Docs and then merged with a new company less than a year after deciding to do that. So right as you finally have everything transferred and functioning well in Google-based processors, you have to now functionally transfer everything back to what it was in the first place. Because there's people whose jobs at hospitals it is to sit around and be like, you know what? Let's switch to Word. I haven't done anything for 6 months except for attend meetings and make PowerPoints or whatever the Google equivalent is. Slides? Is it called Slides?
Man.
Something like that?
If I could get paid to just every 6 months to a year just decide
Ruin
whether or not a
people's
hospital
workflow?
was switching to Google or switching to Word.
Then you'd be making 6 figures.
That'd be awesome. Can you imagine how great our content would be if I had that much money to spend on the channel?
Speaking of money to spend, this is more of a code name How It Feels to Step on 5 Gum production meeting.
Code name Border Collie, damn it.
But it's I'm gonna have another $100 Amazon gift card pretty soon that I'm happy to just spend on whiteboards and shit like that for.
A whiteboard's kind of the thing that we're that everybody is
some
yes,
cheap table or something on Amazon or whatever we're needing.
Yeah, we'll have to.
I volunteer.